Once again, I thank Roy Chika for inviting me to come to speak to all of you. And, you know, I am a mohel. And at a bris, all you need is one baby. So whoever's here, we're going to have a good time tonight. Because the topic is a tremendous topic. And it will be very, very inspirational, as you will see. So I thank Rabbi Alex Miller, Rabbi Chayun, and Roy Chika, and Mr. Shem Tov, for arranging this whole get-together, and hopefully we'll be able to be inspired together. Now, many, many years ago, there was somebody known as the Duvner Maggid. He came from the town of Duvner, and Maggid means basically a storyteller. Now, when we have the Seder, the night of Paysach, one of the 15 categories is Maggid. That's when you tell the story. Now, the Duvner Maggid was the most famous of all the Maggidim that ever lived. He was born in 1740, and he died in 1804, and he would always give stories and parables. And anything that happened in life, he was able to figure out a mashal, a parable, a story, and he was able to inspire people. So one time people asked him, how do you always have a story? For every situation you have a story. So he said, no, you don't understand. He said, I'll tell you a story. And he said, you know, there was once a man that was walking in a field, and he saw a little boy was shooting arrows, and every arrow was dead center. And he went over to the kid. He said, you're unbelievable. Every arrow that you shoot is dead center. He said, no, Rabbi, let me explain to you. You see, first, I shoot the arrow, and then I draw the circles around it. So it looks, you know, like I shot it, but really, I had the arrow there first, and then I drew it. And he said, that's what I do in life. When I hear an idea, that's when I think of the story. Or if I hear the story, I think of how could I apply it. But basically, what I'm trying to do always is to take the stories of life and see how I could apply it. So the Duvner Maggid, he wouldn't tell stories, he would tell a make-believe story, a mashal, a parable. But then over the years, it began developing that people who were Maggidim, they would tell actual stories of things that happened. And I remember the greatest Maggid that I ever knew was the Maggid of Yerushalayim. His name was Rabbi Shalom Shvadron. And it's a whole long story, it's not for now, how I got to know him. He came to America and he stayed in my parents' home. Literally, he was by us for 6 months. And my father got to know him, and when he stayed by us, every night that he was by us and he would tell stories, we would record it, and that's how I got to love all these types of stories. Now, over the years, after my father passed away and I became very close to the Maggid, and he once came to America again, and I took him right here in Brooklyn. There's a man, Mr. Gifter, his father was Rab Mordechai Gifter, the Telzer Rosh Hashiva. And I took Rabbi Shvadron to meet the Telzer Rosh Hashiva. He had known him from before. And I remember I was sitting there and I was listening to something that Rabbi Shvadron said. I couldn't get over it. He said, oh, I remember you from last week. Thank you. Okay? So he said that the first time that somebody called him a Maggid, a storyteller, he felt insulted, because it was as if he was being called somebody who just keeps people awake with stories. And he said, that's not the purpose of a Maggid. The purpose of a Maggid is to use the story to learn a lesson, and through that lesson you become closer to Hashem. He said, I'm not a babysitter. I don't come here to tell stories. But what I do is I try to bring out a lesson from the story, and like this, people will feel closer to Hashem. And that's over the years. There were different Maggidim. There was somebody called the Kelemer Maggid and the Kozhenitzer Maggid. But basically, the most famous Maggid in our time, he never passed away a number of years ago. And it was about 24 years ago already that he passed away. And his name was Rab Shalom Shvadron. And before he passed away, I spoke to him and I said to him, you know, the people in America, the young people, they don't speak Yiddish. And many of them don't know Hebrew. So why don't you tell me your stories and I'll write it down in English. I'll translate them And then people will be able to learn your lessons. And that's how the first Maggid book came to be written. It's called The Maggid Speaks. And it was the stories that he told me, all the stories in the first book of The Maggid Speaks, they were all from him. And the story was written, and then the lesson was written in a different typeface. Now, after I wrote the book, and Baruch Hashem, it sold very, very much, Artsco was very happy. A few weeks after it came out, then Rabbi Sherman from Artsco called me, and he said, you got to write another one. I said, what are you talking about? Where am I going to get the stories from? He said, let me tell you, I just got back from South Africa, and I noticed that on the Rebbe's table, where he was teaching children, he was reading from your book. That means that stories, when you bring out a lesson, they can make a very powerful impact on children. You got to go out and find stories. So I went back to Rabbi Schwadron. I had already taken his best stories, so he still had a few left, and then I started asking people. Wherever I went, I would go to rabbis, I would go to public figures that were involved in things, and then I wrote the second book called Around the Maggid's Table. And then slowly but surely, as people asked me to speak, to tell the stories and to tell the lessons, wherever I would go, people said to me, I got a great story for you. Now, sometimes I would be at a wedding or even on a plane, and somebody would say, Rabbi Krohn, I know you like stories. Can I tell you this story? And then if, let's say, I wasn't so excited about it, and they could see that on my face, they said, well, let me tell it to you again. It doesn't look like you really, like the story. Or sometimes a person will tell me a story and then they'll say, you want to know how to spell my name? Because they want to be sure that they're going to be in the next book. So the truth is, I'm a nice guy. I listen to everybody's stories, but not everybody's stories are worth printing. But tonight, I'm going to tell you fabulous stories about the topic of Hashgacha Pratit. Hashgacha Pratit means divine orchestration. That Hashem orchestrates certain things to happen. And when you hear, oh my goodness, how could that happen? That's only because Hashem orchestrated that it should happen that way. And when you hear story after story, and then you begin to look in your own life about how things happen only because Hashem wants them to happen, that's how you become close to Hashem. When you see Hashem is leading you every step of the way. Now, every morning we make the bracha. We say certain blessings. When we wake up and when we come to the synagogue, and if a woman is davening at home, she says certain brachot, and she says, Hamechin mitzadei gover. We thank Hashem. The simple meaning is that Hashem helps us with our steps, that we're able to walk. But other rabbis understand that Hamechin, Hashem prepares the steps of a person. Hashem makes sure that you are where He wants you to be. Every single one of you, the men, the women, the children, every one of us, Hashem wanted us to be here tonight. That's why He orchestrated that we should be here. As a matter of fact, there's another bracha that we say, and that is, She'osa li kol tzorki. And Rav Schwab points out, this is the only bracha that we say the word li, me. And we thank Hashem, you did for me. You helped me wake up. You let me open my eyes. You let me hear now that I could speak and I could hear what other people are saying. You let me walk. She'osa li. So we thank Hashem that He's doing every little thing for us. And you know what the Gemara tells us? Something very important. The Gemara in Berachos Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis and 33b tells us, Hakol bidei shamayim. Everything happens from Hashem, except Yirat Shamayim. Now, listen to what Rashi says. Everything about us, whether you're going to be tall or short, Hashem decided that. There's nothing you can do about it. You can take all the pills you want. If you're short, you're going to be short. If you're tall, you're going to be tall. You're not getting short. If you're dark-skinned, that's Hashem wants you to be. You're light-skinned, that's Hashem. Rich, poor, smart, not so smart, Hashem gave you the brain. There's only one thing that Hashem says. It's up to you. And that's Yirat Shamayim. Whether you're going to be a tzaddik or chas v'shalom otherwise. That's your choice. Hakol bidei shamayim, chutz meyirat shamayim. And so therefore, we have to know that we can make this choice. How do we make this choice to come close to Hashem? I think when we realize that Hashem is in our lives 24/7, that's how we begin to realize. Now I want to tell you a story, and it's not easy to listen to this story. a number of years ago, I was in Israel during the 9 days. I was going to speak in Binyanei Ha'omah. For the last 2 years, I haven't been there because of COVID. But that's the greatest speech of the whole year. The greatest speech, the reason that it's the greatest speech, not because of the speech, but because of the crowd. There's 3,000 women in Binyanei Ha'omah. And they all want to hear either about personal relationships, about Shemirat HaLashon, and it's tremendous. So a couple years ago, when I came to Israel, somebody called me up and said, you know, there's a woman in Har Nof that wants you to talk. She wants to talk to you. Would you be able to call her? And I said, of course, who is she? He says, well, you really know who she is, but you don't know who she is. I said, what does that mean? He says, well, when I tell you the name, the guy said, you might remember it because of a terrible, terrible thing that happened in Har Nof. Do you remember a couple of years ago in a synagogue, in the morning, there were never 4 guys that were killed in the most brutal way. And then there was a Druzy policeman, he was the 5th one. But there was another Jew that was hurt terribly. His name was Chaim Rossman. And the woman who wanted to speak to me was his wife. He was in a coma for a full year. And when I went to visit her in Har Nof, she told me, you know, in the beginning when a tragedy happens, everybody's talking about it. But after a few weeks, everybody forgets. She said, but I didn't forget. My husband was in a coma in the hospital. I went there every single day. And she kept a diary of what it was to be the wife of somebody who was in a coma for a full year. And Nebuch, after a year, he passed away. And now she had finished a book, and she wanted ArtScroll to print it. And she asked me, maybe I could give her a title for the book because she knew that I wrote a few books for ArtScroll. So I gave her a title, but ArtScroll had a much, much better title. And the name of the book that you could get is called Terror and Emunah in Har Nof. And of course, when it was printed, of course, I bought a few copies and I told her that I did, but there was one thing that she wrote in there that's worth the whole book. It was as if a great rabbi was writing it. Listen to the insight of this woman who was suffering for a whole year. Now, she writes like this. Many people asked her throughout the year, are you in limbo? Limbo, L-I-M-B-O, means like, are you hanging in midair? Like you don't know what's going to happen next. And you're hanging in midair. So listen to what she writes. No. There's no such thing as limbo. Jews are never in limbo, whether they are waiting for a shidduch, a baby, or any other Yeshua or salvation. They are exactly in the place that they are meant to be, to do their avodas Hashem. This is the place where I am meant to be at this time, to serve Hashem, and that is for all Jews at any time or any place in their journey. In other words, the fact that we are sitting here in this beautiful synagogue, this is exactly where Hashem wanted us to be tonight. Every single one of us. And she says, nobody is in limbo. The place you are at is where Hashem wants you to be at that moment. And that's a great lesson in life. And that's the bracha that we said before. If you find yourself in a certain place, you are meant to be there. And you're meant to grow from that situation. And so tonight, we are all here together to listen to stories of Hashgacha Pratit, to see how Hashem orchestrates every single step of our lives. Now listen to this. This story was told to me by a Chaveira member in Lakewood. You're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe any of these stories. But you're going to just see how Hashem orchestrates. So this guy from Chaverim tells me it was Friday afternoon, right before a 3-day holiday. What does that mean, a 3-day holiday? It was going to be Shabbat, and Saturday night was going to be Shavuot, and Shavuot was going to be Sunday and Monday. So it's 3 days holiday, right? You all got to go on diets after a 3-day holiday. We all know, right? So now it's Friday afternoon, and he lives in Lakewood, and he gets a call, and a guy says to him, "Oh, you're from Chaverim?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "Could you come and please help me fix my flat tire?" Oui, he says, "Flat tire? You're coming to Lakewood? Where you stuck, on Route 9? on the Garden State Parkway? Oy vey, it's an hour before Shabbos. He said, no, it's in my driveway. He said, it's in your driveway? And you're calling me before a 3-day yontif? You know how busy everybody is? What kind of business is that? You call me, an hour before Shabbos? So the guy says, I'm an Hatzalah, and I might need the car on Shabbos or yontif. And the Chaverim guy told me he felt so terrible. Here he was accusing the guy of bothering him Erev Shabbos because the car was in his driveway. But of course, a Hatzalah car always has to be ready. He said, I'm so sorry. I'm going to come myself to fix your flat. And he comes to the house, and the Hatzalah guy was so busy on the phone. There were so many different calls. He hardly got a chance to speak to him. And what happened was that the son of the Hatzalah guy wanted to give this guy a gift to Chaverim guy because, he fixed the flat. They don't take any gifts. So fine. And he fixed the flat and he left. Listen to this. Saturday night, the first night of Yontif, this Chaverim guy is sitting at the table with his children, his wife, and his father-in-law and his mother-in-law. All of a sudden, in the middle of the meal, the mother-in-law falls back on the chair. Her eyes are flying into her head. And somebody says, she's having a stroke. Call Hatzalah. Call Hatzalah. And every second counts when somebody has a stroke, chas v'shalom, because there could be brain damage. So they called Hatzalah. And who do you think is the guy who came? That guy who he fixed the flat for. He came and they rushed to the hospital and they saved the woman's life. And he was the closest one. And we know, as I said, that if a person doesn't get a stroke victim to the hospital right away, chas v'shalom, there could be brain damage. So because he fixed the flat of that Hatzalah, he saved his mother-in-law's life. And most of the time, that's a good thing. Most of the time. Not going to say all the time. Most of the time. Right? But that's amazing, right? He told it to me himself. He couldn't believe it. When he saw this guy walk in, the guy that I hope that's not your mother-in-law.
It's my mother-in-law.
It's your mother-in-law? Okay, he would do it for you. Okay. Now, I want to tell you another story. You're not going to believe this. You see, when Hashem orchestrates things, you go crazy. Now listen to this. There's this guy, Dan Kirshner. He told me this story himself. He grew up in Baltimore. He's very, very smart. He was a Baal Tshuva, and he went to an organization called Eitz Chaim in Baltimore. And there was a rabbi there, Rabbi Shlomo Porter, and he saw this guy is so smart. He's got to go to Israel to study for a year, to learn Torah. So he sent him to a place, and it was called Machon Shlomo. That's where he went. If you know anybody that went to Machon Shlomo, he's probably a genius. Very, very bright people in Machon Shlomo. So he was in Israel, and he had a rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Rosenberg, who was teaching every day there. And one day, Rabbi Yaakov Rosenberg is teaching, and Dan Kirshner's in the class, and Rabbi Yaakov Rosenberg is talking about tzitzit, the mitzvah of tzitzit, how important it is. And he says this, the word tzitzit, tzadik yud, taf, is equal to 600 in Gematria. How many strings you have on tzitzit? 4, that's 8, right. 4 and 4, right, 8. And then how many knots you have? 5. So 8 and 5 is 13. So look at that. Tzitzit is equal 600. There's 8 strings. And 5 knots, that's 613. So he said to the boys in the class, when you wear tzitzit, it's as if you're doing all the mitzvot. It's so important. You see that it's equal 613. Well, Dan Kirshner was in that class, and he decided he will never, ever miss wearing his tzitzit. Every day he's going to be so careful the rest of his life. Okay? Now, he comes back to America, and he gets married, and he moves from Baltimore to Silver Spring, Maryland. And every day he goes to work. Every single day he goes to work. And what happens is he goes to the synagogue in the morning. He has a shiur in learning. And then he goes to pray, in that same synagogue. And he gets in his car and he drives to work and he has his first cup of coffee in the workplace. Every day the same system. Gets up very early, goes to learn Torah, finishes Torah, and then he goes to daven downstairs, gets into his car, goes to work, and he has his coffee. Fine. One morning, he told me he was driving. He was driving from the synagogue to the place of work. And all of a sudden, he wanted a coffee. He said, it was crazy. Why did I need a coffee? Now, right now, I needed a coffee. He said, I was going crazy. I just had to have a coffee. So he stopped, and he got off. There was a Starbucks there, and he got a coffee, and he came back in his car. Now, he came back in his car, and he doesn't drive an automatic. I mean, who drives a shift today? But anyway, this guy was driving a shift. Now, I don't know if you know how to drive a shift. I once tried to drive a shift. I almost went through the front window, because, if you're not careful, the whole car is jerking, you could go flying. Anyhow, so he was driving this shift, and he's holding the coffee in one hand, and he's working the gears with the other hand, and all of a sudden the coffee spilled. And it spilled on his shirt, all over him. He couldn't go to work like that. So now he felt so bad. He had gotten up early, go to shul, davened, and driving, because he had to get that ridiculous coffee, it spilled all over him. Now he had to go home to change his shirt. He goes home to change his shirt. He takes off his shirt. He can't believe it. He's not wearing his tzitzis. It was the first time in 2 years that he had forgotten to put on his tzitzis. And he told me, I stopped, he said. I said, thank you, Hashem, that you made the coffee spill. I could have gone a whole day without wearing tzitzis, and I didn't realize it. I can't believe it. And of course, when he was saying Shema by prayers, he was kissing his talit, not his talis cotton. So of course, he put on his tzitzit. Now, you have to look this up online because you're not going to believe it. He came back, he was driving the same spot where he got that coffee. Now, that Starbucks is on Route 29 and University Boulevard. And there's a big green sign. He told me he probably saw it 1,000 times, but it never occurred to him. You know what it says on that green sign? You can look it up. University Boulevard, Route 29 in Silver Springs. The name of the street over there is called Four Corners. Can you imagine? Four Corners. How could that be? Four Corners. That's what the tzitzis are. So it just happened that the night that he told me that story, the next morning I had a bris here in Brooklyn. I'm a mohel. And Rabbi David Krohn, my Rabbi, was the sandik. So at the Su'udah, I told him this story. I said, Rabbi David, you got to hear this story. It's unbelievable. So he told me, he said, I have a great name for the story. I said, what is it? He said, Fringe benefits. Okay. And that's what I called the story, Fringe benefits. So again, you see, it's unbelievable. Now, as I told you before, people always are calling and they're telling me, Rabbi Krohn, I got the greatest story for you. Okay, so I listened, but this lady who called me, her name was Chaya Levinson from Toronto, and it just happened that I was just finishing a book and I had to give it into Art Scroll. They wanted it printed before Hanukkah, because that's, when a lot of books sell. So I said to her, why don't you wait a few weeks and you'll tell it to me, and I'll put it in the next book if it's good. No, she said, no, Rabbi, you got to listen to the story. I'm telling you, you're going to put it in. And something, she was right. Listen to this story. It's hard to believe. This Chaya Levinson, who lives in Toronto, her kidneys were failing. Her kidneys, the doctors told her, were working only 17%. And she needed a kidney. And this was in January 2006. So she went to her rabbi, and she said, Rabbi, what should I do? Should I take out an ad in the newspapers? I need a kidney. And the rabbi said, don't do that. Don't publicize it in that way in the newspapers. But wherever you go, in a shul, in a school, wherever you see Jewish people, just tell people that you need a kidney. And you'll see, a donor will come up. So, of course, she listened to her rabbi, and she didn't put it in the newspaper. And sure enough, there were some people that came forward, but of course they had to be tested to see if they were a match. And there was one guy that was a match, and then a week before the operation, he got sick, and then they couldn't give it. So she was going crazy, because she was now waiting for months and months for a kidney. Now, on the other side of town, there was a couple that just moved to Toronto from Chicago. Their name was Chaim and Mindy Halper. And they wanted to get to know everybody in Toronto, so they decided they're going to make a malava malka. Saturday night, they'll make a malava malka and invite people from the neighborhood. And Chaya Levinson told me she was invited with her husband. So her husband said, let's go. She said, no, I don't feel like going. I'm in such a lousy mood. He said, no, but I'm giving a shiur. They wanted that I should teach Likutei Maran. I'm an expert in that. And, they want a shiur, so come with me. I don't want to go alone. She said, okay, fine, I'll go. So she was sitting in the back, with the women, and he was giving the shiur to the men and the women. And afterwards, everybody was sitting around and eating. Pizza, French fries, or whatever. And so Chaya Levinson remembered, oh my, the rabbi said that when I'm in a group of people, I should say that I need a kidney. So, in conversation, she was like kind of embarrassed, out of Malka to bring it up. But she said, I just want to tell everybody that, that she needs a kidney. She wanted to say that it's only functioning, less than 20%, and she needs a kidney. So Mindy Halper, the woman who moved from Chicago, she says, you need a kidney? I'll give you a kidney. And Chaya told me, what is this, potato chips or French fries? I'll give you a kidney? What, another slice of pizza? And she said, are you serious? He said, yeah, of course. I got 2 kidneys. I'm healthy. I'll be happy to give it to you. And wouldn't you know, both of them went to Toronto General Hospital that Tuesday, and she was a perfect match. And she was able to donate the kidney. And what happened was, after a few weeks, they both were in perfect health, and they became close friends. Now, in Canada, you can't get certain benefits unless you're a Canadian citizen. Now, this Mrs. Mindy Halper, who had given the kidney, she was trying to become a Canadian citizen. She didn't know who to call, but then she found out that Chaya's husband is an immigration lawyer. So she calls him up, and she says, Mr. Levinson, I'm Mindy Halper. Remember we met at my home? He says, how could I forget? You saved my wife's life. She says, I need a little favor from you, maybe. I'm trying to become a Canadian citizen, and I know you're an immigration lawyer. You think you could help me with the papers? He said, help you? I'll do anything for you. You saved my wife's life. What's the question? And of course, he knows all the red tape, and he knows all the ways, to get by everything. And he gets her all the papers, and then he tells her, listen, I have all the papers ready. You'll be able to become a citizen right away, but you have to have a health test. You have to be tested because they don't want to take in anybody in Canada that may have, a strange disease or a contagious disease. She says, I'm healthy, I'm perfect. He said, listen, she said, you could ask my doctor. He said, it doesn't make a difference. They have certain doctors that the immigration certifies. And only by a certified doctor from the immigration department can you get your papers. You got to go to the test. She said, okay, fine. If that's the only way, I'll do it. He says, I know a very wonderful woman who's certified. Go to her. She's a general practitioner. She'll take care of you. She goes there, and this general practitioner takes all the tests and x-rays. And the next day she calls Mindy Halper. She says, you got to come back here right away with your husband. That didn't sound good. What do you mean? Is everything okay? I can't talk to you over the phone. You got to come with your husband. She comes the next day with her husband, and the x-rays are already on the chart. And she shows her that she found a spot on her lung, a tiny little spot. She said, I'm afraid that's the beginning of a cancerous spot. You got to take care of it right away. And you know what? She was operated on, and literally they saved her life. And she told me she didn't need any chemotherapy. They caught it before it was stage 1. But only because Chaya Levinson went to that shiur with her husband and said she needed a kidney, and she donated the kidney. And then she met Chaya's husband, who was the immigration lawyer, who took her to the doctor, and that's how she was saved. And they are both great friends. And for years, again, the last couple years, 2 years, I couldn't go to Toronto in Elul. But one year I spoke for 1,000 people in Elul. And I told this story. And then I said to everybody, take a look right here. Chaya Levinson is sitting right next to Mindy Halper. And I had them stand up, and I'm telling you, 1,000 people were screaming with applause. Hashem saved her life. And that was Hashgacha Pratit. And that's over and over and over when we see how Hashem orchestrates the world and does wonderful, wonderful things. Now, I want to tell you another story that was told by a Sephardic Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchok Amsalam. He lives in Beit Shemesh, and he told this really frightening story. But again, we see what Hashgacha Pratit is all about. And he told the story like this, that there was this fellow, let's call him Gidon. And Gidon had a night job. He lived in Ashdod. And every night he worked very, very late, almost to the morning. And this was his regular routine. On the way home from work, because he worked all night, he would go to Shacharit in the morning. And then he would come home where he would help his wife get the kids off to school. And then he went to sleep. He would sleep 3-4 hours in the morning because he was up the whole night every day. Same system. Work at night, go to pray in the morning, and then come home, help his kids, get to school, and then he would go to sleep. One morning, after he comes home from Shacharit, his wife says, I'm sorry to tell you, but all the kids are going to be home today. There's no school today. For whatever reason, there was no school. He said, oh my gosh, how am I going to sleep here? There's all the noise, they had a whole bunch of kids. So she said to him, your sister lives a couple blocks from here. Why don't you go to your sister's house and, you'll be able to sleep over there. It's quiet, her kids are married. So he calls his sister. She says, yeah, of course, you can come. So he drives over to the sister and, they have a coffee or whatever and, they're talking and then he goes to rest. Now he was just about to fall asleep and he had his cell phone with him. Now every day he would shut his cell phone because he didn't want to get any calls when he was, this day he forgot to shut his cell phone. And of course, as he's about to fall asleep, the phone rings. Now he didn't want to pick up the phone because, he wanted to go to sleep. But he took a look, it was his good friend, Rafi. Now Rafi lived in a moshav. And they would speak every once in a while. But, he lived far away. And he was thinking, should I answer the call or not? Now he's a good guy. I got to answer the call. So Rafi gets on the phone. And this guy picks up the phone, this Gidon. And Rafi says, Gidon, I feel terrible. I'm in such pain. And I need a certain medication. And I live out in this moshav. And they don't have the medication in the drugstore. But I know you live in a big city. You'll be able to get it for me. Is there any way, please? I'm in such pain. I can't even get out of bed. Could you pick up that medicine and bring it to me? And he's thinking, why did I answer this phone? It's crazy. If I didn't answer the phone, he would have asked somebody else. Fine. He says, yeah, for sure. I'll be happy to do it. And he went downstairs. He went downstairs and he opened the door to his car and he was shocked. His baby was in the car. He forgot that he had taken his baby with. And the baby had been in the car for an hour and was pouring sweat. Why did he take the baby? Because he figured the wife has all the kids at home, right? So the baby's going to go to sleep anyway, but he won't be able to sleep because of all the noise. He'll take him to the sister, but he forgot. And it was only because he agreed to pick up that phone, because he forgot to shut it off, that his son's life was saved. So he thought he was doing a favor to Rafi by picking up the medication. It turned out that Hashem had Rafi do him the biggest favor by calling him, and that's how his life was saved. That's Hashgacha Pratit. And when you see stories like this, one after the other, there's a great God in heaven. And he's watching every step. And that's the bracha hameichen mitzadei gover, that Hashem prepares every single step of the way. Now, I want to tell you what Rab Shlomo Zviller, a great Hasidic Rebbe, once said. For every step that you take for a friend, you're saving 1,000 steps that you would have to take for yourself. For every step that you take for a friend, you're saving 1,000 steps that you'd have to take for yourself. And that's what happened. This guy took a couple steps for his friend to get into the car. And Baruch Hashem, his family never had to go through that terrible, terrible tragedy, which I don't even want to think about. But I will tell you, you know what that Chaverim guy told me in Lakewood? The most calls that they get are not calls for flat tires. It's people who left their babies in a car and forgot about it. And you know what he told me? I can't believe it. He said there are women now who leave their purse in the back seat because they might forget the baby, but they're never going to forget their purse. So they're going out to shop, right? How you shop without a purse? Oh, my son. Oh, I forgot you were here. And you know what he told me? It's unbelievable. Some of these women, they leave their left shoe in the back car, in the back seat. You go outside, you can't go out with one shoe, right? So you got to find your shoe. It's in the back. Oh, my daughter's there. How you doing? Right? It's unbelievable. It's frightening to hear those kind of stories. But you got to be careful. Your mind also always has to be attentive. So I want to tell you a story now that is really a story that really defines our lives. And will show you, again, Hashgacha and what we are all about, every single one of us. Now, this story I heard, and I'm always grateful, to a Rav in Detroit. His name is Rabbi Eliyahu. He told me here in Brooklyn, there's a yeshiva called Yeshiva Derech Chaim, and one of the Rosh Yeshivas is Rabbi Moshe Pluchak. And he has a shul someplace in Brooklyn, also a big Talmud Chacham. And this Rabbi Moshe Pluchak was the one who told the story to Rabbi Yellen, who told it to me. Now, this Rabbi Pluchak, every summer, he goes up to a place called Greenfield Park, and over there in Greenfield Park, they have what's called a Kolel Mechanchim. You would love to learn there. All the Rebbes and all the Talmidei Chachamim, the Kolel that are in the mountains in the summer, they all learn there. And there's the Kol HaTorah, and there are many, many professional Rebbes who teach in the camps, and then they come there in the afternoon. So Rabbi Pluchak has been there for years. And every year, you see the same guys, and it might be a new Rebbe or two or whatever, but basically, it's the same group of chevra that come in the morning, different guys come in the afternoon, but they all know each other. One year, Rabbi Pluchak, and I spoke to him also about the story once I heard that it was him, he comes and he notices that there was a businessman that was sitting there learning. Now, very well dressed, and he had never been there before. He never saw him before. And he noticed after like a day or two that anytime this businessman had a question, he was not embarrassed to go over to one of the younger Rabbeim, much younger than he was, and to ask him the question in the Gemara to see how he could understand it. And he was so impressed with this man, he decided, I got to become this guy's friend. Because he's really special. He comes here and he's not embarrassed to ask the younger guys when he has a question. And one day Rabbi Pluchak goes over to him and he introduces himself. He says, my name is Rabbi Pluchak. I've been here, for many years. I never saw you here before. Where do you come from? So he says, I'm a businessman. But I come here because the Art Scroll Gemara is carrying me. He says, what? What do you mean the Art Scroll Gemara is carrying you? He says, I'm very sick. He said he has liver cancer. And he said, if I would think how sick I really am, I couldn't exist through the day. So I come here to learn Torah. I never had the experience of learning in a yeshiva, so I have to ask a lot of different questions, so I should be able to understand. And that's why I have the Art Scroll Gemara. So Rabbi Pluchak said, look, I want to be your friend. I don't want you to ask anybody any questions, just come to me. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find it for you. But don't go to everybody else, just come to me. You and I will become friends. And they became very, very close friends for the rest of the summer. And anytime this businessman had any questions, no embarrassment, he would go over to Rabbi Pluchak and he would talk to him and he would explain him everything that he wanted. Next to the last day of the summer season, Rabbi Pluchak came into the Beis Medrash, and this guy who always sat pretty much up front, he wasn't there. And he got worried. He was looking around like, where is he? And he saw him in the back. He was sitting in the back, and his head was down, and he looked very sad. So Rabbi Pluchak went over to him, and he said, is everything okay? He said, Rabbi, not really. He said, my illness is progressing, and I keep thinking, who cares what I learn anyway? What difference is it? He says, you guys, you're big rabbis, you teach Torah, you know so much. You think I understand everything that everybody's telling me? You think I understand everything in the Art Scroll Gemara? What difference is it if I learn anyway? Who cares? You guys, you make a difference because you can teach Torah to others. Now, Rabbi Pluchak told me that it was a miracle, that just the night before, he heard something on the Jewish radio station that he said over to this man. And I'll tell you what he said. The night before, on a radio station, he heard this story. Many years ago, in the 1950s, there was a great symphony orchestra. You could look it up. He was an Italian guy. Some of you may have heard the name, Arturo Toscanini. He was the greatest symphony orchestra leader in his time. Go online tonight, Toscanini, you'll see all about him. He was a genius. He was a little crazy, like many geniuses, and he had a raging temper, but he had a photographic memory, and he knew every orchestra piece, and he knew everything, and he led concerts all over the world. And there was a guy that was doing his biography because he was getting older already. And he knew that he better write this biography soon because otherwise Toscanini is going to die. So he would meet with him every day. And one day, the biographer called Toscanini and he said, I'd like to come to your house tomorrow night because I want to finish off the book. We want to get it done. He said, no, tomorrow night you can't come. He said, why not? Why can't I come? He said, because tomorrow night, you see, I used to travel all over the world to lead orchestras, but now I can't. I'm not strong enough. My health is failing. So tomorrow night, I'm going to be listening to a concert that I was supposed to be the orchestra leader. I just want to see and listen without any interruptions how that orchestra leader, how that conductor leads that symphony. He said, I won't say a word, I promise you. I'll sit on the other side of the room. He said, you promise you won't say a word? He said, I'll walk in, I'll sit on the other side. I just want to listen together with you. So sure enough, the next night, this guy comes, and he walks in 7:45. The concert was going to be at 8 o'clock. And he sits on the other side, doesn't say a word. 8 o'clock, Toscanini is so totally concentrating to see how the conductor is leading that symphony orchestra. And they listen for a half hour, and it is unbelievable. After a half hour, Toscanini shuts off the radio because the concert was over. And the biographer says to Toscanini, wasn't that great? That was amazing. And Toscanini says, no, it wasn't. He said, what do you mean it wasn't? So Toscanini says there was supposed to be 120 musicians there. 15 was supposed to be violinists. Only 14 showed up. And this guy's thinking, he's crazy. How could he know over the radio that 14 out of 15 showed up and one violinist was missing? But he wasn't going to say that he's crazy because otherwise he wouldn't let him finish the book. So he decided, oh, wow, that's amazing. I didn't realize that. And the next day, the biographer called the symphony orchestra leader to find out in that country how many musicians actually showed up. And he finds out that there were supposed to be 120 musicians, 15 violinists, and only 14 showed up. He could not believe it. How could this guy have known that? That was such a genius. How could he have known that only 14 out of 15 were there? The next night he goes back to Toscanini and he says to him, Your Honor, I really want to apologize. I can't believe that. I didn't believe that. You could know that. But I found out that it's really true. There was only 14. How in the world did you figure that out? He said, I'll tell you why. There's a great difference between me and you. See, you're part of the audience. To the audience, everything sounds good at a symphony orchestra. But the conductor knows every single note that's supposed to be played. And when I began to realize that some of the violinists, it wasn't as strong as it usually is, I knew that there was a violinist that was missing. So Rabbi Pluchak tells this man this story, and he says like this, maybe to me, it doesn't make a difference that you're learning Torah, but to the conductor of the World Symphony, Hashem, he knows every line of tefillah that can be prayed, every line of Torah that can be learned. He knows, and to him, it makes a difference. The guy was so amazed at that thought. He got up and he hugged Rabbi Pluchak and he said, how could I thank you? How could I thank you? And the next day they parted ways and this guy went back to his house and Rabbi Pluchak went back to his yeshiva. That winter, he met the son of this businessman. And he said to him, how's your dad? I had such a good time with him in the summer. He said, my dad passed away. He said, I'm so sorry to hear that. But then the son said, but I want to tell you something. Ever since he came home, every time he opened up his Gemara, the first thing he said, I'm playing the music for the conductor of the World Symphony. Could you imagine that? He's playing the music for the conductor of the World Symphony. And you know what I learned from this great story? That we are all one big orchestra. We're all playing music for the conductor of the World Symphony. Some of us are cellists, some of us are drummers, some of us play the keyboard. Everybody's different. Some can play the harp, some can play the flute, some can play the tuba. I don't have to be like you, you don't have to be like me, and both of us don't have to be like him. Every one of us is a musician. And maybe it doesn't make a difference from one musician to the other, but to the conductor of the World Symphony. He knows what we can do. He knows how much we can learn and how much we can pray. And if we do it, it makes a difference to him. And if it's missing, he knows. And that's what Yiddishkeit is all about. That's what Judaism is all about. Playing the music to the conductor of the World Symphony. And I just want to end just with this great story because it has to do with Hanukkah. And we will see now tremendous Hashgacha Pratis. This story happened in Bergen-Belsen in the concentration camp. And there was a rabbi there. His name was Rabbi Shraga Shmuel Schnitzler. Everybody called him Rab Shmelka. And he was such a kind, warm person. And it was the month of Kislev, where we are in right now. And he tried to give chizuk. He tried to give encouragement to all the people in the barracks. And he told them, we're going to be able to light Hanukkah candles here in the barracks. And they said to him, Rab Shmelka, it's crazy. What are you talking about? He said, I'm telling you, you'll see. We'll be able to do it. And he was giving them chizuk. And he had a terrible, terrible job. Every late afternoon, he had to take out all the dead bodies. And he had to carry them out to the crematorium. And he knew so many of the people that were on that wagon that he was walking alongside, or he had to carry some of the bodies, and he would cry. It was terrible. Every late afternoon, the same place, back and forth, he would take the bodies. And one late afternoon, he almost tripped because there was a lump of ground that wasn't there the night before. Where did this lump of ground come from? What is going on here? This wasn't here last night or yesterday afternoon. And he decided he's got to check it out. He wasn't going to check it out when the guards were watching. So when he felt that it was clear, he ran back out and he started digging in that little mound of ground to see what was in there. And when he dug it, he could not believe it. There was a little jar of oil. There was some cotton for some strands of wicks, and there were little cups that you could put the oil in. And he was thinking, this is unbelievable. A Jew must have hidden this someplace. And my favorite part of the story is that he left it there. Because he knew if another Jew hid it, even though he told everybody they're going to be able to light Hanukkah candles, he didn't want to take it if another Jew put it there. So he ran back to the barracks. He didn't tell anybody where he found it, but he said, did anybody hide any oil or wicks or cups? Nobody knew what he was talking about. Every day he watched it to see if that lump of ground was still there. And then when it came Erev Hanukkah, that night was going to be Hanukkah. And he saw nobody came to pick it up. So he decided, listen, for whatever reason, the guy didn't come back. I'm going to take it. And he took the cups of oil. He took the flask of oil and the cups and the wicks, and he lit the first night. And he said the 3 brachot. The first night we say 3 brachot because we say Shechayanu. And people were crying. They couldn't believe, how could it be in the concentration camp that they had Hanukkah candles? I had oil. It was impossible. Every night they lit it. Every night the people cried. They couldn't believe. Now this was in Kislev. Kislev is usually, November, December. in April, 4 months later, April 1945, they were all liberated. And he went back to Hungary. He went to the town that he came from, and he was known as the Chaba Rav. He came to a place, Bekesh Chaba, that was a place in Hungary, and people would come to him for blessing, for brachot, because they knew that he was a big tzaddik. When 1951, he decided he's going to come to America for a visit. And he decided he's going to visit the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum in Williamsburg. And why did he want to go to Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum? Of course, because he was a Gadol Hador, but also he was in Bergen-Belsen. And now they would be able to share experiences, what happened in Bergen-Belsen. And he comes to the Rebbe in Williamsburg, and they're talking all about Bergen-Belsen, everything that they went through. And finally, the Rebbe says, you know, I feel bad. He said, what do you feel bad? He said, you know, I bribed one of the guards, and he let me hide oil and cups and wicks. And I buried it, and it was never used. And I feel terrible that that oil that I put away was never used. And he says, Rebbe, what are you talking about? You can't believe I was the one who found it. He said, why didn't you pick it up? He said, because I was liberated 4 days before Hanukkah. So I was able to get out. He says, I can't believe you actually lit it. And he said, yeah, Rebbe, you gave chizuk to hundreds of people in the barracks because you were able to we were able to light the candles and the wicks and the oil only because you saved it. And the Rebbe said how great it is that once again Hashem made a miracle with oil in the month of Kislev. And that's the final thing that we have to remember. Hashem makes miracles even today. We have Hashgacha Pratit. So many stories. So many stories. I'm writing a new book, and I just heard a story last week that's unbelievable, where a rabbi from Israel, it's hard to believe. I spoke to him himself, and I spoke to the doctor. This guy wanted to go to a fellow named Fuchs, because he knew this guy Fuchs was a wealthy guy. But the driver, who was an Israeli, he saw Pei Kuf Samach. He read it Fox. And he took him to a doctor, Dr. Fox. And when he was in the house, Dr. Fox told me, the guy's looking at him, you're not Fuchs? He said, no, I'm Fox. I'm Dr. Fox. So he said to him, Dr. Fox, what kind of doctor are you? It turned out he was a dermatologist. It's hard to believe what I'm about to tell you. So the rabbi said to him, you know, I have some spots on my hands and my face. Are you able to take them off? He said, yeah, come to my office tomorrow. It doesn't look like anything serious. I'll take it off with laser. And then while he was there in the doctor's office, he says to the doctor, you know, could you check my stomach and my back? I think I have something on my back as well. And you know something? The doctor told me, he took one look at it. He knew it was bad. They removed it, and they found it was cancerous. And then he went back to Israel, and his life was saved because he went to Fox instead of Fuchs. Now, eventually he went to Fuchs and got the money that he wanted, but that was a different trip. But the idea was, he went to the wrong place, but it was the right place, because the driver made a mistake. It's unbelievable. So every one of us should know Hashem is watching us. Anything is possible. And now that we come to the holiday of Hanukkah, miracles can happen every single day. Hashem should bless all of us, that we should merit Hashem's love and His concern and miracles for all of us. Have a wonderful Hanukkah. And thank you, Mr. Shem Tov, for filming, Rabbi Chayun, and all the wonderful people. Thank you so much.